Welcome to the Celebrating Women podcast, hosted by Mandee Montana, a podcast that celebrates women, their stories, their struggles, and ability to overcome. Conversations that celebrate their gifts, their talents, and courage. It's the Celebrating Women podcast, presented by Hand and Stone Massage and Facial Spa in Tyler, Texas. Hey, it's Mandee Montana. You know I love my friends at Hand and Stone Massage and Facial Spa in Tyler, and they are helping us out with some very important daily skincare routine tips. I have the lead esthetician, Chelsea Everett, here with me. Chelsea, what are a few things that we can do daily to help take the best care of our skin?
General sunscreen that you wear, you do want to reapply it about every 2 to 4 hours. But just making sure that you're reapplying it is one of the most important things. It's not really a just one and done, go on about your day. Your skin secretes oils, like you're touching your face, you're sweating, it comes off after that short period of time. So it's super important to make sure that you're reapplying. Again, not only for preventative aging, but skin cancer is so crucial.
And of course, we can help our skin look and feel its best by coming in to see you at Hand and Stone here in Tyler. Make your appointment today. Stop by the spa in the Cumberland Shopping Center or make your appointment online at handandstonetyler.com. Welcome back to the Celebrating Women podcast. I'm Mandee Montana with Rev Karn.
Hey, Rev Karn, back in the house.
Yes, and we've talked about a few different things when you have been on the podcast, but today we're going to kind of go back to the beginning, and we're going biblical today.
Yes, biblical.
Which I'm excited about because we're going to feature some interesting women in the Bible.
Yes, yes.
So the first time you were here, we covered a lot of different things. We talked a little bit about faith. We talked a little bit about your story, being here in East Texas. And then we touched a little bit on some stories of women in the Bible. You were talking about your favorite passage, that you wanted to be a judge's woman. Mm-hmm. And it was so entertaining. But I am going to just admit it. While I have been raised in various churches and exposed to the Bible and read various stories throughout my years, this is a story I don't know much about. So I am probably going to be very curious and asking a lot of questions because I'm just not well educated in this area.
Yeah, no, that is totally fine. I think one of the things that people, I think, get nervous about when they meet pastors or they meet people that go to church or they meet, people who teach Sunday school is that they feel like they should know more than they know.
Yes.
And just
or that's
because,
how I feel.
Well, and I think there's this misconception that you grow up in America, which is a Christianized nation, and you have freedom of religion, that everybody just knows everything. And that's not the truth. And so which is interesting because I think in that not being the truth, people are able to twist the truth, big T. Mm-hmm. And so I love it when people say, I love to be a person that people feel comfortable saying, I don't know a lot about that. Can you tell me more?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I would love to tell you more. I would love to tell you more.
That makes me happy because that's exactly how I'm showing up today.
Yes. Well, I love that. And thank you for your honesty. So we are in the middle of a sermon series at my church here in Tyler, Texas. And we're doing characters of the Bible. Mm-hmm. I like to do that during the summer because the weeks kind of stand on their own and you have lots of visitors and people in and out. And so it makes it fun. And then it kind of gives, me and my associate Susan something to kind of dive into in the summer that's a little bit different than just like a sermon series on, the lectionary or something like that. And so this past week, what we did is we asked people in the congregation to give us their favorite Bible characters or who would they like to know more about in the Bible. And of course, some people use this as like a stump the pastor. Like, we're going to choose the beast in Revelation. And you're like, okay, that one's going to have to wait for a few weeks. I got to do a little more research on that. But others are like, King David, Paul, Stephen, Adam and Eve, like Cain and Abel, these that are very well known. And one of the ones that came up a lot was Ruth and Naomi. And if you're not familiar, there are 2 books of the canon of the Bible that is in print everywhere. There are other versions, but that there are 2 books of the Bible that are named after women, and that is Ruth and that is Esther, and they are both in the Old Testament. And what's funny is that they find themselves in the middle of what we would call the prophet ruler wisdom kind of section, which to me is awesome because women, I think, do offer a lot of wisdom. Mm-hmm. And I think there's this misconception with a lot of people in the Bible that women have a very specific role to play in the life of the church because that's what it is in the Bible. And I think that is I don't think that is the appropriate narrative. I think that women played a huge role in the Bible. And I think that, any woman can find a role model in the Bible to kind of, go after if that's what they choose to do. But Ruth and Naomi are an incredible story. So.
Well, when you look at the history of how kind of the Bible came together, it wasn't women who put it together.
No.
Right? Mm-mm. So just looking at it through that very kind of sharp perspective, mm-hmm. it's kind of obvious that they're not maybe featured as much as mm-hmm. they could be because they weren't the ones telling the story. Mm-hmm. And history is often written by the people who either conquered or were the victors, or typically the men.
Right.
And I'm not complaining. It just is what it is. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't surprise me that they're not featured more prominently, but I am interested in looking deeper mm-hmm. and kind of understanding the context and the history within the narrative to highlight them.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because I say to people, the Bible was written by man. And I say man because men are the ones who were educated. They're the ones that could write. They're the ones that could, mm-hmm. Hold office and make those decisions, but inspired by God. And one of the things that I see is that even though the Bible was pieced together by, let's face it, very privileged, white, educated men of that time that were chosen by whoever was the ruler at the time to put it together, the fact that there is so many stories of women, oppressed people, poor people, lowly people, there is so much in there that could have been even left out even more, makes me realize, okay, yeah, this was divinely inspired. And at some point there was wait a second, maybe we should put that in there because in the story of God's people, that's kind of important here. Mm-hmm. So it's, just, kind
divinely guided.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, for sure. So, okay. So why do you think Ruth and Naomi came up so much?
So I think Ruth and Naomi came up so much because, and I think it comes up because people don't even realize why it comes up. So Ruth and Naomi is a story of, there's a woman named Naomi. She marries a man, and in the ancient, first century, even Old Testament times, women were nothing. They couldn't hold office. They couldn't have land. They didn't have a say. They didn't have a vote, to the point that if they did not have a male relative to agree to take care of them, they were kind of SOL. Like they were up the creek, right? Mm-hmm. You had to beg. You had to borrow. You had to do whatever you could to survive. And that's part of the reason that Jesus said you take care of the widows and the orphans, because that's typically because they didn't have male relatives that could take care of them. Part of our job is to take care of those people, make sure that they are well taken care of, because the times did not allow them to really do anything on their own.
Yeah.
But Naomi has 2 sons, and those 2 sons marry. They do not produce any offspring. Ruth is one of those daughters-in-law. Ruth marries one of her sons. Now Naomi moves out of the land of Israel into the land of Moab, which is another big town in the Old Testament, big land, if you will. And so she moves there with her husband and then her sons. And then when her sons die and her husband dies, she is left with 2 daughters-in-law, 3 women who their land is taken from them. They have no way to make money. They have nobody to take care of them because there are no other male heirs, and they're in a foreign place. So basically one of the daughters-in-law, she decides, I'm going to stay here with my family. Her family agreed to take her back. Ruth and Naomi don't have anybody to take them back. And so there's this wonderful story of how Naomi is like, hey, Ruth, you stay here in this land, which is yours. Go remarry, find somebody to take care of you. I'll be on my own. And Ruth says, no, I made a covenant to you and your family when I married your son. Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Where you die, I will die. And it's this great covenant of like 2 women that are literally going to stick it out and stick it together because they realize it's going to be really hard for the 2 of them. And it'll be easier for both of them if they're together than alone. Mm-hmm. So they set off to go back to Naomi's homeland, which is Israel. And they attempt to find a place where they can settle. And they end up finding a place on land that is owned by this man by the name of Boaz, that is a very well-known landowner. And essentially, he ends up seeing Ruth's worth and ends up marrying Ruth. Ruth ends up having a child, and that child then goes on to have another child. It then has King David. King David is the lineage of which Jesus comes from.
Okay.
So Ruth plays plays this goal. But what's really cool is that there's this great story in there where Ruth shows up at the vineyard and in the fields and just starts working. No one gives her permission. She just does it.
Interesting.
She just does it. And there was a practice where you would leave 10% of what was in the field, called the chaff. You would leave 10% of whatever was in the field for the widows and people to come get who could not work the fields and who did not have food of their own. Ruth started working the fields, made her presence and made her importance and her worth known to Boaz. And Boaz was like, wait a second, this woman may be, more than meets the eye. Mm-hmm. There's also a great seduction scene in there, but I just kind of like leave that off to the side. But even, back in antiquity and ancient Old Testament, women did what they needed to do to survive, which to me is just we've always had chutzpah. We've always had to do it, right? I mean, whatever
Right.
puts food on the table, whatever takes care of your family.
Right.
Not condoning all of those actions, but sometimes you gotta.
He saw a different element of her worth.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It was the whole package, if you will. He was able to see her worth in many ways. So
Yes.
Anyway, it ended up working out well for them. But the grace that Boaz showed, the faithfulness that Naomi and Ruth showed, kind of the redemption of these women who society was like, well, sorry, we can't help you, is this whole story of, wait a second, which is kind of the bigger picture of the whole story of God's people, of faithfulness and grace and stuff like that. And so it all plays in. When you read the story, you see the bigger overarching. So
part of what I didn't understand, and I shared this with you off mic, I'm going to share it again because I wasn't totally prepped for this conversation. Mm-hmm. So I had a manicure this morning, and my friend Chelsea that does my nails is amazing, and she pulled up YouTube Kids version story of the Bible of Ruth and Naomi. And so basically I got a very animated, cute version of what you just told me. And at the very end, it talked about the lineage. So what I find interesting about all of this is if these two women, if Ruth had not decided that she was going to honor that covenant that she made to Naomi, we wouldn't have Jesus.
Potentially not. Yeah. No, we would no. Because
Ruth, she wouldn't have
yeah.
met Boaz. Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't have had an heir who then had King David, who so on and so forth. And so that blew my mind this morning because I was like, wait a minute. So this was actually a pretty pivotal moment.
Yeah.
That produced massive impact down the road.
Right. And so these two women created a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
And they did it in like kind of saying, I'm going to go against the grain. Yeah. I'm going to say, okay, this is what society has said, but there is something bigger for me. And my faithfulness to God and our faithfulness to each other left Moab, went into a foreign land, back, even though it was Naomi's hometown, but she had been gone for a while. This pivotal moment, and then you look forward to, at the tomb, when Jesus is resurrected 3 days after Easter, you have this pivotal moment of two other women who were very faithful to one another, Mary and Mary, and who did the hard work of going to the tomb. They, too, had a very pivotal moment. And so, not that men did not play a role.
Right.
They didn't.
Right.
But women played a huge role. They played a huge role. And I feel like, why would we stop that now? And I feel like we are in this kind of society where we're moving backwards almost to where it's like women need to be put in their place. And I'm like, wait a second. They've always pushed against what society told them they were. Because women have always known their worth before men did. And I find it interesting that so many people, especially in my line of work, and I realize not everybody is comfortable with a female pastor. I understand that. But there are a lot of people that are, and I feel like I fit a need. I know that I have a call from God on my life to share the gospel message and to share hope and peace and grace and all of those things. Like, I know that. When people tell me that, it doesn't rock my world like it used to. I just kind of go, well, okay, that's now I challenge accepted, right? Rewrite at dawn. Anyway, so what can I do to change their mind? No, I feel like we live in a world now, and I'm going to say this, and it might be a little provocative. Women have shown their worth in so many cases that I think it scares people.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I find when women show their strength, oftentimes to an insecure man, it creates a lot of fear because they feel, here I am I'm putting feelings out there, but I feel like a lot of men feel they need to be a protector and a provider. I feel like that's pretty like essential to most men. And so some are really secure in themselves and able to say, I would like a partner that wants to fill whatever role is best for her in that element. Can she also provide? Can she also protect? Or maybe she doesn't want to do those things and she just wants to be nurturing. Other men that are maybe not as secure in that, if they see a woman who also wants to provide and protect and be strong, are threatened by it. And, it's interesting because I don't think it's as black and white as maybe the narrative is now, like you're saying. I don't think it's as black and white as males should have this role, females should have this. There's a lot of nuance there. Hey guys, it's Mandee. I love Hand and Stone Massage and Facial Spa in Tyler. And one of the things I love the most is they're always doing new things. And I recently tried their new sports massage, and I've got to tell you, it's incredible. So I'm active and I'm always focused on wellness. And this is just one more thing that I am adding in to my routine because now I'm hooked. They use the Theragun, which of course is going to help increase blood flow to certain areas and muscles that might be sore or tired or need attention. But you also get to add on another upgrade. Whenever I was there, I chose to go ahead and do the cup gliding as well as the hot stones. They work really well with the Theragun, maybe like a triple threat. Definitely ask for it the next time you go in to Hand and Stone. Ask about the sports massage. You can book your appointment today online at handandstonetyler.com, or you can stop by and see them. They're located in South Tyler in the Cumberland Shopping Center. And we all have different strengths as humans, so why not look for that element as opposed to saying, I'm going to stick you in your place, for men and women.
Yeah. Like, I am not a good housekeeper.
Nor am I.
I am not a good housekeeper.
Not either.
If somebody is looking for me to fill that role, no. What I will do is I will try to put my laundry away within 5 days of actually like washing it and folding it, and like only let it sit on my couch for 5 days. But I will also do my best to like hire a housekeeper. But if that is a role that someone wants me to fill, I am not good at that. Just like there are some roles that men are not good at. There are some roles that women are not good at. And making someone fit into a role that they are not good at is exhausting and not life-giving at all. Like, why would you want somebody to fill a role that they are not good at?
Right.
Or that they don't want to do. Now, granted, I'm not saying, sometimes you got to do what you don't want to do.
For sure.
But I feel like we sometimes put men in these positions to be the head of the household and to make all of the decisions about religion and how things are done. Maybe they don't want to do that. Maybe they want to be the one that keeps house. Maybe they're the one that wants to, teach the children. And I think sometimes we are not comfortable having those conversations because we're worried about what other people might say.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who, they are scared to make more money than their husband because their husband's family might think that they are emasculating their husband. And I'm like, if you're a trained attorney, you're going to make more than a teacher. And that's our society that says that. That is not...
Whether that's correct or not.
Whether that's right, wrong, and different. But the odds are, if you're an attorney, you're going to make more than a public school teacher.
If you're any good at it.
Right, exactly. Now, if you're not good at it, maybe not.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes we just have to realize that as a female, as a woman who is in ministry, which a lot of people, especially in East Texas, see as a man's world. I try really hard not to have a chip on my shoulder. I try really hard not to puff up. But I'm not gonna lie. It's hard for me when people just assume something about me. There was a conversation I had the other day. I was at an after hours networking event. And a gentleman came up to me. He was older gentleman, and I'm sure he is delightful. Conversation started out great. Great. He is a corporate representative for a utility here in town. And I was explaining to him that I worked at the church that I work at, and that we could not benefit from that utility because it did not reach our area. And he kept on, and I was like, I promise you, like, we would look at it if we could, but you're not in our area yet. Mm-hmm. And he hands me his card, and he says, well, why don't you give this to the pastor? Let him know if he wants to have a conversation with me. I would be more than willing.
I take it you didn't lead with, I'm the pastor.
No. I typically don't lead with, I'm the senior pastor, because it does put people kind of like immediately on the defensive. It's, unless I want to get out of something, like it's a great like get out of jail free card. I mean, if there's somebody, you know, giving me attention that I don't want, it's real easy for me to say I'm the senior pastor. Yeah. And they're like, oh, okay, well, okay.
So how did you respond to this gentleman when he...
Yeah, so I took his card and I said, thank you so very much. I'll be sure to give you a call if and when we need your services. And his response was, well, why don't you just give it to the pastor? And my response was, because I am the pastor. And his face, like, you know, whatever. And of course, he started backtracking and all of those different things. And of course, you know, I tried to segue because he had a team on his shirt. He was wearing a collared like shirt that had a football team on it, a college team on it, if you will. And I said, oh, so you're a fan of whatever this college team is. And then he just kept digging himself a little deeper because he didn't know I was from Tennessee and I was a huge University of Tennessee fan. And I just felt really bad for the guy because he just couldn't.
He couldn't recover. He dug that hole so deep.
He had started with, you know, that, and then he went into sports, and you know, the listeners may not know me really well, but I do know sports more than the average female might. And so it ended awkwardly, but it was fine. I mean, I still have his card. It's in my stack of business cards on my desk at my office, but it's just kind of one of those things that I don't mean to make people feel awkward, but it just makes them feel awkward, usually of their own doing.
Yeah. I think it comes back to we could ask more questions and we could listen better. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are more questions to ask even around, like, circling back to Ruth and Naomi's story. Like, what could be gleaned from that? I mean, what would make Ruth say, no, I'm going with you? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't know. Obviously, we can't ask her. But is there historical context? Are there clues in and around the story? And maybe in different translations. I don't know. We've talked about that previously, too, that different versions of the Bible may tell the story a little bit differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting because, you know, when it comes to Ruth and Naomi, obviously, I think there was a larger divine plan in that.
I agree.
Obviously.
With the lineage
and everything like that. But also, I think that it just kind of shows that, like, so what Ruth said to Naomi, where you go, I will go, your people will be my people, your God will be my God, where you die, I will die. I use that whenever I do marriage ceremonies as part of the vows, right? Because it is a covenant. It is a promise. It is a promise that where you go, I go. And it's not a submissive thing. It's not a whatever you say, I'll do. That is absolutely not what that is. It's where you go, I will do my best to go with you. Mm-hmm. If that is in life, if that is a new place to move, if that is a new opportunity, whatever that is, that's a lot to say to somebody. Like, that means where you go, I will go. I will go to the depths of hell with you if you need to sit there. And that's a hard place to be with friends. And I've been there with lots of friends. And your people will be my people. Oh my gosh. Like, your people are my people. Like, your family is my family. And that's what Ruth did. Naomi, who was not her family, she married into this. Naomi's son was her family. But basically, she was like, because your family is my family and your people are my people, I will literally go wherever you go, not knowing what that could mean for me.
It sounds like it's also a really beautiful friendship within family.
Yes.
You know, like, that doesn't always happen, right? I mean, There are some terrible stories of mothers-in-law. I don't have that experience. I have a wonderful mother-in-law, but I've heard tell that can be a really difficult experience. And this is a really beautiful, I think, story of how that can go right and how you can choose how to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we are looking at these 5 different focus areas in our church right now, and one of them is kinship, which is different than friendship. Kinship means you're somewhere in between a chosen family person and a born family person, and how you kind of go back and forth between that, meaning that like we have a kin, like we're kin to each other, but it's also a friendship. And so I kind of looked at it through the lens of like true kinship. Ruth and Naomi. It was, I will give up of myself to support you because I know how it, in that situation, in that societal context, Ruth could have remarried a lot easier than Naomi could have.
Oh, yeah.
Naomi was no longer childbearing age. Naomi had no dowry to give. There was no reason for anybody to marry Naomi. Ruth was young enough. She still had something to offer, which was a potential,
Children.
lineage, which is what she offered Boaz and
Offered all of us.
I guess, in the end.
Yeah.
And so I think,
Wow.
I think this, and it ended up working out really well for Ruth, evidently. So I think sometimes we just have to look at, to go back to the role of women, I have seen in my life, it is easier for women to do that sometimes than it is for men.
To do what?
To be friends like that, and to kind of
to
make that covenant relationship, to make that whatever. I think maybe because there is this assumption that men have to stand on their own, which is why I think that friendships are so important in any age, in any gender, in any way, shape, or form, because I think you need those people to kind of say, no, buddy, where you go, I will go. I will sit with you in the middle of this, but I'm also going to hold you accountable for it.
I do think it's harder for men. I saw a really great illustration of that with men. If this at all interests you, this may be kind of a way left turn, but I started watching Welcome to Wrexham, which is the documentary that Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney by this soccer team, this football club in Wales. And I was mainly interested in it because I think Ryan Reynolds is adorable. That's why I started watching this.
Same.
However, it's this really beautiful story of how these two men form a friendship around storytelling of this football club, the town within it, the people within it, and how they all form this community around this football club and the story behind it. And as you watch the series, they touch on the beauty of the friendship that Ryan and Rob have with each other, even though they live across the country and in different countries sometimes from each other. They stay in touch. They are incredibly compassionate towards one another and affectionate towards one another when they see each other. It's a nice way to see. I think there's a particular episode in general where they say sports allows that for men. In a way that society doesn't always. So it's an opportunity for men to be affectionate with each other, to touch each other, to celebrate together. Like, I mean, you see it. They slap each other on the butt. They hug each other. They fist bump, whatever.
Yeah.
Sports allows for that kinship
Yeah.
within them, I feel like, where it's maybe not going to happen in a bar.
Yeah.
Like,
I think
interesting.
that's so sad because I know so many men who could benefit from having somebody say, dude, where you go, I'll go. Your people will be my people.
Yeah.
Like,
and it doesn't have to be a brutal, like, there doesn't have to be a physicality to it, but I feel like that's what, they seem to be drawn to, whether it's sports or whatnot.
yeah. Because sometimes you just need somebody to sit there with you, And sometimes as much as the Bible gives us as far as these great role models for women, I feel like it also gives us a lot of confusion about women and their role in the Bible. Yeah, I look back on, the different times people have said, well, what about where the Bible says this? Or what about where Paul says this about women, in their role or whatever? And I think to myself, yeah, Paul said a lot about women. Paul said a lot about the role of women. I don't know that Paul really liked women either. I'd like to know, if I could go back in time, I want to ask Paul, who broke your heart?
Oh, okay.
And what did she do to you?
Interesting. Yeah, because we don't have the whole story there either.
Who broke your heart?
Yeah.
What did she do to you? Mm-hmm. We're not all like that.
Can we dig into the confusion on another episode?
Absolutely. I think yeah, I would love that. I would like
to do more homework before the next one too.
Absolutely.
So
yes, absolutely.
Questions.
I think it's so funny to me when people are like, well, Paul says, and I say, yes, but Jesus says this. So Paul, don't get me wrong. The letters of Paul, he traveled. We would not have Christianity the way we did if Paul had not traveled all over the Mediterranean, right? Like we know that. That's a given. And we know that Paul went to all these places and that he was able to bring people together of different backgrounds, of different ways of life. And he was able to unite them under the call of Christianity, right? Of the way, which is what it was back then.
But he's also not divine. He's not divine. He's not perfect.
No, Paul is a person.
He's a human. Yeah.
Paul is a person.
Right.
Paul is not fully divine and fully human. Paul had a call on his life. He had a very dramatic change in his life from who he was before to when he afterwards. And his call was to go and spread the joy in the gospel of Jesus Christ. That was Paul. And Paul did it, I think, in the best way he knew how to do it. And back then, when you are starting something, you have very rigid rules. Everything kind of fits in this box. He was going and telling people who had never heard of Christianity before, who had never heard of this one God before, who had never seen a lifestyle like this before, this is how you do this. And it's a lot easier to get people to do what they need to do if the means are very strict and very black and white.
So true, just like parenting.
Very strict and very, very black and white, right?
Yeah.
It is a lot easier to be on a diet if you say you cannot eat any of this, you can only eat this. Instead of saying moderation. You say moderation, that means something different to everybody, right? Okay, so I have ice cream. I have a pint of ice cream instead of a half gallon of ice cream, right? To some people, that's moderation, right?
Right, yeah.
For some people, it's I drink Diet Coke once a day instead of 4 times a day. For some people, that's moderation. Some people will say, no, you don't ever need to have any of that ever again. This is all that you eat. I don't know. I mean, for some people, that works really, really well. When you have a new faith community, that can work really, really well. But then the minute people start asking questions, people start thinking, wait a second. Wait just a second. Maybe I can still keep my job and be a Christian. Maybe I, as a woman, can fill this role and still do like the end is still what we want it to be. So I think Paul is one of those individuals who there was this wonderful, wonderful lady in the first church that I was appointed down in Clute, Texas. Her name was Miss Wanda. She was 86 years old when I was there and salt of the earth, like saint of the church, right? She, had, kids and grandchildren, and she would come to our Bible study. And I remember one time looking at her and talking to this Bible study of women and just saying, I really struggle with Paul. I really struggle with Paul.
She said this or you did?
I said,
okay.
I really struggle with Paul. And Miss Wanda looked at me. I will never forget. She looked up from her Bible that had all these notes in it. You could tell that it was probably at least 50 years old. She looked up from her Bible and she looked at me and she said, Kimberly, I think Paul's just a real son of a bitch. And it was. It was hilarious.
Oh,
and
my.
It was in that moment that I was like, okay, I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
Like, I am not the only one who struggles with this. And, but I think really there are some questions that I would really like to ask Paul. If I would have him at a dinner party, it would be, who broke your heart? What did she say? We're not all like that. And I think you could say that about so many things in the Bible, right?
Well, for sure, yeah.
And I think you could say that about a lot of men and a lot of people that have interpreted the Bible the way that they do, right? A lot of people who have said things to me like, well, the Bible says you can't do it. So are you just like ready to go to hell? And I was like, I mean, well, I prefer the heat over the cold, but, I think we just have to.
Welcome to Texas.
I'm sure my snark and sass don't help with the situation. I realize that I do not fit the mold. I'm very much okay with that. And I'm very much okay that other people are not okay with that. What I would appreciate, though, is people considering, like I said, ask questions. Don't just insert their narrative, because there's also, I have followed a lot of colleagues that didn't really do women in ministry any favors. And I think when you're the person that follows someone like that, that's a hard place to be. And I give thanks for the women my mother's age and even my grandmother's age who kind of forged those ways for us in the workforce and in society. They had to be gruff. They had to stand their ground. I don't, and I thank them for that. I try really hard not to do that because I think sometimes the softer side can win people over. I'm not afraid to be gruff, and I'm not afraid to put people where they need and say things if they say things that are offensive. I just think sometimes we have to be careful in whatever role we play, wherever our world is, to try to be to offer as much grace as possible.
So one of my favorite quotes from Walt Whitman is "Be curious, not judgmental."
Yes.
And now I fall short of this on a regular basis, but that's where I try to sit within myself. And when I do find myself being judgmental about something, when I catch myself, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, let's back this up and let's be curious instead. Let's think about this from a different perspective. Let's see it in a different light or ask more questions and get more clarity. But yeah, that's one of my favorite quotes. Be curious, not judgmental.
It's interesting because we actually read a book. I'm in a leadership cohort, and we read a book where it was talking about how to be curious in conflict. How do you remain on the side of curiosity instead of the side of like fixing things or being judgmental or having to make a decision immediately, stuff like that. And I think sometimes people they need an answer so quickly because that black and white can be very comfortable.
Yeah.
Yes or no.
Yeah, the known.
The maybe is we're going to do this, not this. They're right and I'm wrong. Or I'm right and they're wrong. People like to sit in that so much that they lose the curiosity. And one of the things I love is watching kids be curious.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to figure out the world around them.
It's hilarious.
And so I love that. Be curious, not judgmental. And I think we could learn so much from that. Think of what we could learn about each other if we did that.
And about, if we continued to be curious about the stories in the Bible, women in the Bible, I feel like that's the lens I want to look at this through, like as we kind of continue this conversation.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about the confusion.
Yes.
I want to talk more about that. And then maybe some additional narratives of maybe women that are hidden a little bit in the Bible. Like, could we dig out and put a spotlight on some stories that maybe aren't often talked about?
Yeah.
Because you're like grinning from ear to ear. I'm like, she's got these stories. That. And I'm not going to find them because I don't know where to start.
But can we ask people that are listening to help us?
I would love that.
Okay. So like if they're listening and there are some women that they want to know, okay, perfect.
And reach out to us in all the ways. It's always at the end of the podcast, but we're on Facebook. We're on Instagram, celebratingwomenpodcast@gmail.com. You can drop us a voice message there, or of course, just send a written message.
Absolutely.
Either way, but lots of ways to reach out. So yes, we would love the feedback, and don't be shy.
Yeah.
We want to include you in the conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The more people in the conversation, the better. I feel like the more voices around the table, the better.
The Celebrating Women podcast wants to hear from you. Email us a voice message to celebratingwomenpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear your story or the story of an incredible woman you know. Become part of the conversation on social media. Facebook.com/celebratingwomenpodcast. On Instagram, search Celebrating Women Podcast. The Celebrating Women podcast has been presented by Hand and Stone Massage and Facial Spa in Tyler, Texas. Book your appointment today. Stop by the spa in Cumberland Shopping Center or online at handandstonetyler.com. Support the show for as little as $3 per month at celebratingwomenpodcast.buzzsprout.com or visit our show notes. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to the Celebrating Women podcast.
Hey guys, it's Mandee. Have you been struggling to lose those extra pounds? Oh, I know. I have totally been there. An extra, 15 to 20 pounds can totally creep up on you in perimenopause. Or at least it has with me, and I think I found it early. I hope it's not happening to you. But if it is, I've got the solution. You can lose up to 15 pounds in 8 days with an incredible product line that I found and I want to share with you. Get a custom product recommendation with a complimentary wellness screening in the show notes. Just click Zing with Mandee.